Hello, my dearest listeners, and welcome to Pillow Tales. I am Clara Beaumont, your gentle guide through the velvet hours of the night, and I am so delighted you have joined me once again. Before we begin, do share in the comments from which quiet corner of the world are you listening tonight? A cozy bed in the countryside, perhaps, or a fireside chair in the city. Knowing these whispered words reach you warms my heart immensely. Tonight, we step into the refined elegance of 1935 England for a classic detective mystery in the tradition of Agatha Christie. This is the gentle art of brewing the perfect herbal tea, a tale of subtle poison, hidden motives, and the triumph of order, featuring the incomparable Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Allow the languid descriptions, the delicate scents of herbs, and the measured pace to cradle you toward deep, restorative sleep. Dim your lights, settle beneath your covers, feel your limbs grow heavier, and let the story unfold. Opening hook. In the hushed drawing room of Willowbrook Manor, amid the faint aroma of chamomile and bergamot, Lady Eleanor Hargrove raised her delicate porcelain cup to her lips. The herbal infusion, her own meticulous blend, celebrated throughout the county for its restorative virtues, steamed gently in the firelight. She sipped once, twice, her face serene. Then, without warning, her eyes widened in silent alarm. The cup slipped from her fingers, shattering upon the Persian rug. She clutched her throat, gasped a single, strangled breath, and collapsed lifeless amid the scattered petals of dried lavender. No mark upon her body, no intruder in the locked manor, only the lingering scent of perfectly brewed tea, and the certainty that someone had mastered the gentle art of murder. Chapter 1. The Arrival of Order. In the hushed drawing room of Willowbrook Manor, amid the faint, lingering aroma of chamomile and bergamot that seemed to cling to every velvet cushion and polished surface, Lady Eleanor Hargrove had taken her final sip of tea. It was a ritual she performed each afternoon with the solemnity of a priestess at her altar. A delicate porcelain cup raised to her lips, the herbal infusion of her own meticulous creation steaming gently in the golden firelight. She sipped once, twice, her face composed in that serene mask of aristocratic poise she had worn for decades. Then, quite suddenly, her eyes widened in a flicker of silent alarm. The cup slipped from her slackening fingers, shattering upon the ancient Persian rug in a cascade of fine china fragments and dark liquid. She clutched at her throat, her breath coming in a single, strangled gasp, before she collapsed lifeless amid the scattered petals of dried lavender that had fallen from the overturned saucer. There was no wound upon her body, no sign of struggle beyond the overturned chair. The heavy oak doors to the drawing room had been closed, the windows latched against the autumn chill. The manor itself, isolated amid the rolling hills of the English countryside, had been locked, as was customary after luncheon. No intruder had been seen, Only the lingering scent of perfectly brewed tea remained, and the chilling certainty, whispered among the servants, that someone in the house had mastered the gentle art of murder. News of the tragedy reached London swiftly, carried on the wings of urgent telegrams and the hushed indignation of county society. It was the peculiar nature of the death, swift, silent, and seemingly impossible, that prompted the invitation. Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the celebrated Belgian detective, retired to the quiet cultivation of his moustache and vegetable marrows, received a personal appeal from the chief constable, an old acquaintance who knew better than to dismiss what others called coincidence. Thus, on a crisp afternoon in late October 1935, Poirot arrived at Willowbrook Manor. His small, compact figure stepped down from the gleaming Rolls-Royce with the precision of a clockwork toy, his patent leather shoes crunching upon the gravel drive as though measuring each step. The English mist hung low over the landscape, veiling the ivy-clad walls of the manor in soft grey, while the skeletal branches of ancient oaks clawed at the pale sky. Poirot paused to adjust his overcoat, a garment of impeccable cut, and to survey the facade with those sharp green eyes that missed nothing. The house was beautiful, yes, Georgian symmetry, mullioned windows, the quiet dignity of old money. But beneath its elegance, Poirot sensed disorder, chaos, the kind that only murder could bring. He twirled the magnificent points of his moustache with satisfaction. Order, after all, was his profession. Where others saw confusion, he saw pattern. Where others saw accident, he saw design. And here, in this secluded manor with its locked doors and lethal tea, design there most assuredly was. The butler, a tall, cadaverous man named Carver, whose face betrayed no emotion beyond a lifetime of practiced deference, ushered Poirot into the entrance hall. The air carried the faint, herbal perfume that seemed to permeate every corner of the house, mingled now with beeswax polish and the smoke of a dying fire. Portraits of long-dead Hargroves gazed down from panelled walls, their eyes stern and watchful. In the drawing-room, where the tragedy had occurred, the household had gathered in subdued mourning. Dr. James Whitby, the family physician, a slender man in his 40s with earnest brown eyes and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles, stood nearest the fireplace. He had been Lady Eleanor's devoted protégé in the study of herbal remedies, sharing her passion for the restorative powers of plants. It was he who had examined the body first and pronounced, tentatively, sudden heart failure. Miss Victoria Langley, Lady Eleanor's niece and sole heir, sat upon a chaise longue in a gown of severe black, her sharp features pale but composed. At 28, she possessed a beauty that was more striking than soft: high cheekbones, dark hair severely pinned, eyes that flashed with intelligence and something harder to define. Resentment, perhaps. She had lived under her aunt's roof for years, subject to the older woman's iron control over the estate and its fortune. Captain Reginald Thorne, a weathered man in his 50s with a military bearing and sun-browned skin from years in India, stood apart by the window. He had been Lady Eleanor's suitor in their youth, before duty called him abroad. Recently returned, he had renewed his acquaintance with the manor, and, some whispered, his hopes. Mrs. Agnes Fletcher, the housekeeper, hovered near the tea trolley like a protective spirit. A woman of indeterminate middle age, stout and plainly dressed, her devotion to Lady Eleanor had been absolute. She had served the family for 30 years, rising from scullery maid to the position of trusted confidant. Finally, there was Mr. Edmund Blake, the young gardener, a handsome lad of 25, with soil beneath his fingernails and a sullen expression. He supplied the manor with rare herbs from his meticulously tended beds, and had, only days before the tragedy, been dismissed by Lady Eleanor for what she termed insolence. Poirot greeted them with a small bow, his English flawless, though lightly accented. "Mesdames et messieurs, I am desolated to intrude upon your grief, but death, particularly death so unexpected, demands clarity. The chief constable has asked me to lend my modest abilities." Dr. Whitby cleared his throat. "It was heart failure, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Eleanor had been feeling the strain of late. The symptoms were classic." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Classic, you say?" And yet the maid who discovered her ladyship reported convulsions of the limbs, a bitter taste upon the tongue mentioned in delirium. These are not, I think, the classic signs of the heart alone. No, they suggest poison, and poison, when administered in a cup of herbal tea prepared by the victim herself, suggests a very particular kind of intimacy with both the brew and the brewer. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Victoria's lips tightened. Captain Thorne's jaw set. Mrs. Fletcher dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Only Blake met Poirot's gaze steadily, almost defiantly. Poirot inhaled deeply, savouring the herbal perfume that still lingered. Lady Eleanor was renowned for her blends, was she not? The gentle art of brewing the perfect herbal tea, calming, restorative, precise. A science, almost. And yet science, when perverted, becomes the perfect weapon. Someone in this house understood that art well enough to turn restoration into destruction. He turned toward the conservatory door, visible at the far end of the hall. "We shall begin there, I think, with the tea itself. For in the leaves, as in life, the truth is always waiting to be steeped." The little grey cells were already stirring. Order would be restored. It always was. Chapter 2. The Ritual of the Brew. Poirot stood in the conservatory of Willowbrook Manor, a glass-walled sanctuary attached to the east wing like a glittering jewel box. Sunlight filtered through the panes in pale autumn shafts, illuminating rows of drying racks where bundles of herbs hung in precise, fragrant clusters. The air was thick with the mingled scents of mint, rosemary, valerian, and something sharper. Foxglove, perhaps, or the faint bitterness of monkshood. Every jar upon the long mahogany workbench was labelled in Lady Eleanor's elegant, looping hand. Calming blend, chamomile and valerian, restorative tonic, nettle and dandelion, evening serenity, lavender and lemon balm. Beside them lay her scales, delicate brass instruments calibrated to the gram, and a leather-bound notebook open to a page of meticulous entries, proportions, steeping times, observed effects. It was here, in this private domain, where no servant was permitted without express invitation, that Lady Eleanor had prepared her fatal infusion. The door, Poirot noted with satisfaction, possessed a sturdy Yale lock operable only from the inside when fully engaged. A habit of hers, the housekeeper had explained, to ensure absolute solitude during her meditations upon the plants. Dr. James Whitby hovered at Poirot's elbow, his spectacles glinting nervously as he watched the detective lift each jar in turn, inhaling deeply, examining the contents with the concentration of a connoisseur sampling fine wine. "She was brilliant, you know," Whitby said, his voice soft with genuine admiration. "Years ahead of the medical establishment in understanding the therapeutic properties of herbs. I learned everything from her. Digitalis for the heart, valerian for sleep, willow bark for pain, all in precise, safe dosages." Poirot replaced a jar of dried foxglove leaves, Digitalis purpurea, with deliberate care. "Precise, yes. And therein lies both the beauty and the danger, Doctor. For what heals in moderation may kill in excess. Tell me, on the day of her death, who prepared the blend?" "No one but Lady Eleanor herself," Whitby replied promptly. "It was her inviolable ritual. Each morning she selected her herbs, measured them here, then carried the mixture to the drawing room in a small silver caddy. The maid brought hot water at precisely 3 o'clock. Lady Eleanor infused it personally." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet she died. The symptoms, the convulsions, the bitter taste reported by the maid who attempted to revive her, these speak not of heart failure alone, but of poison. Analysis of the dregs, I am informed, revealed elevated levels of digitalis." Whitby paled. "But foxglove was a regular component of her calming blend. A therapeutic dose, never more." "Therapeutic for most, perhaps," Poirot murmured, turning to the notebook. "But for a woman of her age, with a heart already weakened, or if the dose were augmented." He ran a gloved finger down the page. The entries were immaculate. Dates, quantities, observations, until the final page. There, beside the formula for evening serenity, the ink appeared fresher, the pressure of the pen heavier, as though written in haste. And in the margin, a single pressed leaf, small, heart-shaped, with a distinctive veining, not matching any labelled specimen. Poirot removed it with tweezers produced from his pocket. "This leaf, Doctor. What is it?" Whitby leaned closer, adjusting his spectacles. I cannot say. It resembles cow parsley, perhaps, but the veining is wrong. Certainly not one of her usual herbs." "Interesting," Poirot said softly. "For cow parsley is harmless, but its close relation, fool's parsley, Ethusa sinapium, contains a deadly alkaloid, indistinguishable to the untrained eye when dried." The implication hung in the perfumed air. Someone had introduced a foreign element into Lady Eleanor's sacred ritual. Someone who understood the gentle art of brewing tea well enough to substitute one leaf for another, one cure for a poison. Victoria Langley entered then, summoned by the butler, her black gown rustling like dry leaves. "You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Indeed, mademoiselle." Poirot bowed slightly. "Your aunt controlled the estate with a firm hand, I understand. The inheritance? Yours upon her death, but with conditions?" Victoria's chin lifted. "Aunt Eleanor believed in duty. She delayed my full inheritance until I married someone suitable, her word. A man of property and position, not the penniless artist I loved. Yes, I resented her control, but murder her for it? Absurd." Poirot studied her coolly. "Resentment is a powerful motive, mademoiselle. And you understood her blends?" "I observed, certainly, but I never touched them. Aunt forbade it." As Victoria departed, Poirot returned to the notebook. Beneath the pressed leaf, faint indentations from the previous page, writing impressed through. Holding it to the light, he discerned words. "Beware the doctor's ambition." The little grey cells stirred. Ambition, control, inheritance, and a leaf that should not be there. In the stillness of the conservatory, amid the hanging herbs that whispered secrets with every faint breeze, Poirot felt the shape of the crime beginning to form. The perfect brew had been perverted. But by whom? And how had the poisoner gained access to this locked sanctuary of leaves and precision? The answer, he knew, lay not only in the herbs themselves, but in the human hearts that tended them. Chapter 3. Motives in Bloom. Poirot moved from the conservatory to the manicured gardens beyond, where the herb beds lay in precise geometric patterns, bordered by low boxwood hedges damp with morning dew. The air here was cooler, sharper, carrying the earthy tang of turned soil and the faint, acrid note of certain plants that thrived in the shadows. Mr. Edmund Blake, the gardener, knelt beside a bed of monkshood, aconitum napellus, its tall spikes of deep blue flowers hooded like the cowls of sinister monks. He worked with deliberate strokes of his trowel, his young face set in sullen lines, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms browned and muscled from labor. Poirot approached with his characteristic light step, scarcely disturbing the gravel path. "Monsieur Blake, you tend a dangerous beauty here. Monkshood, the queen of poisons, is she not? Even the roots, handled carelessly, may bring death. Blake straightened, wiping soil from his hands onto his apron. His eyes, a clear hazel, met Poirot's without flinching. Dangerous, yes, sir, but useful too, in minute doses for pain. Lady Eleanor knew that. She had me cultivate it specially. And yet, Poirot said mildly, only days before her death, she dismissed you for insolence. A quarrel over missing roots, I understand. Blake's jaw tightened. Missing? Stolen, more like. I told her straight. I suspected poachers from the village. She accused me of carelessness, of selling them on the sly. Me, who'd tended her gardens for 5 years. I was furious, I admit. But poison her? With my own plants? I'd be the first suspected. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Indeed. And yet aconite, the toxin in monkshood, acts swiftly, painfully, matches the symptoms precisely. Digitalis was the first assumption, but the laboratory confirms aconite now. Blake paled beneath his tan. Then someone took it from my shed. Anyone could have. The doors never locked. From the garden, Poirot observed the manor's rear facade, noting the servants' entrance half hidden by ivy. Motives, he reflected, were blooming like the deadly flowers around him. Resentment from the dismissed gardener, perhaps the most obvious thorn. Returning indoors, he sought Captain Reginald Thorne in the library, a room heavy with leather-bound volumes and the scent of aged paper. The captain stood by the window, gazing out over the misty lawns, a glass of whiskey in hand despite the hour. His military posture remained erect, but lines of strain etched his weathered face. Captain, Poirot began, settling into a wing chair. You knew Lady Eleanor in her youth. A great romance, cut short by your posting to India. Thorne turned, his eyes distant. Great, perhaps. She chose security over passion, married Hargrove for his title. When I returned last year, widowed myself, I hoped. Well, she welcomed me cordially, but her heart had hardened. She spoke of past mistakes, of poisons both literal and figurative. Poisons? Poirot's eyebrows rose. You brought specimens from India, I hear. Hemlock, perhaps? Thorne laughed shortly. A few dried samples for the Royal Horticultural Society. Conium, yes, poison hemlock, but locked in my trunk. And Socrates' poison would taste of anise, not bitterness. Irrelevant here. Yet motives, Captain. Did she reject you anew? Thorne's grip tightened on the glass. She implied I sought her fortune. Insulting, but not worth murder. Poirot departed, filing away the captain's controlled anger. A red herring, perhaps. The exotic poison too obvious. Mrs. Agnes Fletcher awaited him in the housekeeper's sitting room. A small, neat space smelling of lavender polish. She sat ramrod straight, hands folded in her lap, eyes red-rimmed but dry. Mrs. Fletcher, Poirot said gently, you served Lady Eleanor faithfully for 30 years, a devotion profound. She was more than employer, Fletcher replied, voice trembling. Saved me from the workhouse as a girl, taught me everything. herbal lore included. I prepared her trays, but never the blends. That was sacred to her. And yet, Poirot pressed, you knew the conservatory's rhythms, the hidden passage from the servants' quarters, convenient for one who wished to observe unseen. Fletcher gasped. I'd never harm her. She was family to me. Family. The word lingered. Poirot noted the housekeeper's plain features, echoing faintly Lady Eleanor's own, perhaps a distant connection. Victoria Langley received him in the morning room, embroidery in hand, though her stitches were uneven. You suspect us all, Monsieur Poirot. But consider, my aunt controlled my life utterly. Debts from London seasons, a suitor she deemed unsuitable. Yes, I dreamed of freedom, but I was in the village that afternoon, shopping. Witnesses abound. Poirot smiled. Alibis, mademoiselle, are like flowers, beautiful, but sometimes artificial. As evening fell, Poirot reviewed the evidence. Footprints in the herb bed, small, leading toward the hidden passage. A broken teacup in the kitchen refuse, suggesting a discarded, failed attempt. The motives bloomed vividly. Inheritance delayed, dismissals rage, rejected love, betrayed loyalty. Yet the locked conservatory door mocked them all. In the fading light, Poirot returned to the garden. Beneath the monkshood, a fresh disturbance in the soil, and a single glove, torn, bearing traces of blue stain. The killer had left a petal in the path, but whose hand had plucked it? Chapter 4. The Poisoner's Palette. Poirot retired to the manor's library that evening. A room of dark oak shelves, groaning under the weight of botanical tomes and leather-bound volumes on pharmacology. Lady Eleanor's private collection, bequeathed alongside her herbal wisdom. A fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the Persian rugs and winged armchairs. He settled into one, a small volume on toxic plants open upon his knee, his green eyes reflecting the flames as he pondered the palette of death laid before him. The laboratory report, delivered by urgent post from London, had shifted the ground beneath the investigation. Not digitalis from the foxglove as first supposed, but aconite, swift, merciless, derived from the roots of monkshood. A poison that brought burning pain, paralysis, and death within hours, indistinguishable in dried, powdered form from certain harmless roots when blended skillfully. Poirot closed the book with a soft snap. The killer is an artist, he murmured to himself. One who understands not merely poison, but substitution, the gentle art perverted. A leaf for a leaf, a root for a root, hidden in plain sight among the innocent. He summoned Dr. Whitby once more, finding him in his temporary quarters, a guest room converted to a makeshift surgery. The doctor looked drawn, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he pored over medical journals. Doctor, Poirot began, seating himself precisely. You studied toxicology extensively with Lady Eleanor. Aconite. You are familiar? Whitby started. Of course, highly dangerous. Even skin contact with the fresh plant can cause numbness. But in her blends, impossible. She was meticulous. Yet the dregs confirm it, Poirot replied evenly. And monkshood grows abundantly in the garden, tended by young Blake. Whitby flushed. Blake? He had cause, dismissed in anger, and access unlimited. Poirot twirled his moustache thoughtfully. Access, yes. But knowledge? Would a gardener substitute aconite root for, say, dandelion in a restorative tonic without detection? Whitby hesitated. Unlikely. The taste is bitterly acrid. Lady Eleanor would have noticed immediately. Precisely, Poirot said. The killer required not only access, but intimacy with her recipes, the exact proportions where a stronger root might pass, masked by peppermint or anise. To demonstrate, Poirot had arranged a recreation earlier that afternoon. In the conservatory, under watchful eyes, he measured a harmless blend: chamomile, valerian, a touch of mint, then subtly introduced a trace of harmless bitter root. Steeped, the infusion retained its calming aroma, the bitterness subdued. The palate of the poisoner, Poirot explained now to Whitby. Colours blended, so the fatal hue hides among the benign. You, doctor, possess such knowledge? And a motive, perhaps? Lady Eleanor planned to expose irregularities in your credentials. I learned from her solicitor's preliminary notes. Whitby's face drained of colour. She mentored me, guided my research. But exposure? Ruin, yes. Yet I revered her. I would never... Reverence, Poirot interrupted softly, can curdle into resentment when ambition is thwarted. Leaving Whitby stammering denials, Poirot sought further strokes on the canvas. A search of the gardener's shed yielded monkshood roots, some freshly harvested, quantities missing. Blake, confronted again, insisted on theft. Anyone could take them at night, the sheds unlatched. Captain Thorne's trunk revealed the Indian hemlock, dried specimens, indeed irrelevant, the poison too slow and distinctive in flavour. A deliberate distraction? Thorne admitted planting rumours of his exotic poisons to deflect suspicion from domestic sources. Mrs. Fletcher, meanwhile, confessed to discarding a broken teacup days prior, Lady Eleanor's, chipped during a heated argument with Victoria over unsuitable correspondences. Victoria herself, under Poirot's gentle probing, revealed mounting debts from London, loans to support her artist's lover, forbidden by her aunt. The palette grew richer. Ambition, Whitby; rage, Blake; rejection, Thorne; betrayal, Fletcher; desperation, Victoria. Yet the locked conservatory remained the frame, entry impossible without Lady Eleanor's knowledge, or so it seemed. That night, as the household retired, Poirot prepared his own evening tisane, chamomile from a sealed packet he had brought himself. He sipped slowly by the fire, savouring the pure, golden infusion. But midway through the cup, a faint bitterness intruded, subtle, masked by honey he had added. He set it down untouched, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. The poisoner had struck again, at Poirot himself. The artist was growing bold or desperate. And in the morning, the little grey cells would demand a reckoning. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Conservatory. The bitterness in Poirot's tisane lingered upon his tongue like a warning whispered in the dark. He had poured the remainder into a vial, sealing it carefully for analysis, but the intent was clear. The poisoner, emboldened or panicked by his probing, had extended the brushstroke to the detective himself. The house slept uneasily that night, the autumn wind rattling the conservatory panes like impatient fingers upon glass. Poirot, ever methodical, set a trap. The following morning, he announced at breakfast, with calculated nonchalance, that he had identified the precise source of the aconite and intended to confront the culprit by evening. "A small experiment this afternoon will confirm all," he declared, his eyes sweeping the assembled faces. Victoria's fork paused midway to her lips. Whitby adjusted his spectacles with trembling fingers. Blake, invited indoors for the meal, scowled into his tea. Thorne stared stonily ahead. Fletcher bustled with unnecessary vigour over the toast. The bait taken, Poirot withdrew to the library, leaving the conservatory unguarded but watched. From a shadowed alcove in the adjoining billiard room, where heavy curtains provided concealment. As dusk gathered, the household dispersed. Footsteps echoed faintly in the corridor, hesitant, then purposeful. The conservatory door creaked open. Poirot, silent as a cat, observed through a crack in the curtains. Mrs. Agnes Fletcher entered, her stout figure silhouetted against the dying light. She moved not with stealth, but with the familiarity of long service, proceeding directly to the workbench. Her hands, steady despite her earlier tears, reached for certain jars, rearranging them subtly, removing a small packet from her apron pocket and slipping it behind others. Poirot stepped forward, his presence announced by the soft click of his heels. "Madame Fletcher, you disturb the evidence. Or perhaps you protect it?" She started violently, spinning to face him, her face ashen in the gloom. "Monsieur Poirot, I only meant to tidy. My lady hated disorder." "Disorder?" Poirot echoed, approaching the bench. "Or to remove traces of tampering. Come, madame. You knew the rhythms of this room better than any. The hidden passage from your quarters allows unobserved entry." Fletcher's composure cracked. She sank onto a wicker stool, hands wringing in her lap. I heard things. Arguments. Threats. Miss Victoria in a rage. "I'll see you dead before I let you control me forever." I feared. I only moved things to shield her. She's young, impetuous. My lady wouldn't want scandal. Poirot's gaze softened fractionally. "Devotion, madame, is admirable. But shielding a murderer? No. Tell me." Did you see Miss Victoria enter here on the day of the death? Fletcher shook her head. No. But she borrowed my passage key once, said she'd lost an earring in the still room. And that afternoon, she claimed to be in the village, but the groom says the car never left the stable until evening. Victoria's alibi, then, was fragile as dried petals. Yet Poirot pressed further. And the glove found in the passage, torn, stained with garden soil and aconite residue? Fletcher's eyes widened. That belongs to young Blake. He uses the passage sometimes, for shortcuts with heavy loads, but he swore innocence. The shadows lengthened as Poirot examined the hidden passage. A narrow door concealed behind a tapestry in the servants' corridor, leading directly to the conservatory's rear wall. Dust upon the floor showed recent disturbance, small footprints overlapping. Multiple visitors, Poirot murmured. The passage is known to more than one. As night fully descended, the conservatory grew chill, the glass walls reflecting the moon like watchful eyes. Poirot secured the room, but not before noticing a fresh scuff upon the workbench, a mark as though from a medical bag hastily set down. The trap had caught a protector, not the killer. But Fletcher's revelations illuminated corners previously dark. Victoria's crumbling alibi, Blake's access via the passage, perhaps even Whitby's opportunity if he had borrowed the key. The poisoner remained at large, the palette incomplete. And in the quiet hours, Poirot pondered the torn glove, left deliberately or carelessly by one who believed shadows would conceal all. The conservatory held its secrets still, but the little grey cells were weaving them into pattern. Chapter 6. The Deception of Dosage. Poirot stood once more in the conservatory the following morning, the pale winter sunlight filtering through the glass like a reluctant witness. The events of the night, the attempted poisoning of his own tisane, had confirmed what his little grey cells had long suspected. The killer was not content to await discovery, but sought to silence inquiry itself. The vial of tainted infusion had been dispatched to London for confirmation, but Poirot required no laboratory to know the hand that stirred it. He summoned Edmund Blake to the garden, where the young man worked with forced industriousness among the frost-touched beds. The torn glove lay upon the workbench, its fingers stained with earth and faint blue residue. "This is yours, monsieur," Poirot stated, holding it aloft. "Found in the hidden passage, with traces of aconite upon the fabric." Blake stared, then laughed bitterly. "Aye, it's mine. Lost it days ago. But passage? I use it for wheelbarrows, heavy loads from the potting shed, saves steps. Anyone could have taken the glove." Poirot nodded. "Convenient. Yet the dosage, young man, the precise augmentation of aconite root to mimic a harmless restorative, requires more than a gardener's rough measure. It demands knowledge of her ladyship's exact formulas." Blake flushed. "I supplied the plants. She told me weights sometimes. But I never... never entered the conservatory unobserved? Poirot interrupted. The passage permits it. And on the fatal afternoon, Lady Eleanor briefly left her blending to answer a telephone call in the hall. A call that interrupted her ritual at the crucial moment. Blake's eyes widened. Telephone? There was no call. The exchange records show nothing. Precisely, Poirot said softly. A deception. The bell rang, summoned by an accomplice outside, perhaps, or a timed device. Enough to draw her away for minutes only. Time for the substitution. Captain Thorne, drawn by the raised voices, approached from the terrace. My hemlock samples, he admitted gruffly when questioned anew. I mentioned them freely, perhaps too freely. Someone hoped to cast suspicion on exotic poisons, away from the monkshood under our noses. A deliberate misdirection, Poirot reflected. The imported hemlock, a vivid splash on the canvas to obscure the domestic toxin. Dr. Whitby joined them, summoned urgently. His face was drawn, his medical bag clutched tightly. You accuse me still, Monsieur Poirot? My credentials, yes, irregularities. She threatened exposure. But murder? Poirot regarded him steadily. The dosage, Doctor. Therapeutic knowledge perverted. You alone understood how to mask the bitterness, how much to add for swift effect. Whitby protested vehemence, but Poirot turned to the workbench, recreating the blend once more. With precise movements, he measured chamomile, valerian, then paused. The deception lies in the moment of absence. The telephone call, fabricated. But who could arrange such without detection? Mrs. Fletcher, hovering at the door, provided the thread. The hall telephone connects to the village exchange, but a second line in my lady's study for private calls. A line accessible to guests, to Whitby, who had treated her privately, to Victoria, who frequented the study. The glove, Poirot now saw, was Blake's, but placed deliberately in the passage to incriminate the obvious suspect. As the group dispersed uneasily, Poirot lingered, examining the conservatory door's lock. A simple bolt thrown from inside, yet faint scratches upon the frame, recent as though from a thin tool or a string. The little grey cells illuminated the mechanism. A length of twine looped around the bolt, passed beneath the door, pulled to engage it, then retrieved through the gap, possible for one familiar with the house's drafts and tolerances. Mrs. Fletcher's domain again, or borrowed knowledge. But the dosage, the intimate precision, pointed elsewhere. That evening, Poirot discovered a second notebook, concealed in Lady Eleanor's bedroom behind a false panel in her escritoire. Entries in her hand detailed not herbs, but observations. Whitby's falsified papers, and his clandestine meetings with Victoria in the summer house. An affair. Betrayal on multiple fronts. The palette clarified. Love thwarted by control. Ambition threatened by truth. The telephone deception, arranged by Whitby perhaps, from the study line. The killer had not acted alone in planning, but the hand that augmented the dose was one. And in the quiet of the manor, Poirot prepared the final revelation. The deception of dosage and of the heart would be exposed. Chapter 7. The Locked Room. Illusion. Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room the next afternoon, where the fire burned low and the air still carried the faint, ghostly perfume of chamomile that no amount of airing could dispel. The shattered cup had long been swept away, but its absence lingered like an accusation upon the tea trolley. Outside, autumn rain lashed the windows, blurring the gardens into a watercolor of greys and muted greens. He stood before the fireplace, compact and immaculate, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice precise and measured, "we confront an illusion, the locked room. The conservatory door bolted from within, Lady Eleanor alone with her ritual. No window forced, no key duplicated. Yet poison entered her cup. How? All eyes fixed upon him. Victoria rigid upon the chaise, Whitby polishing his spectacles incessantly, Thorne standing like a sentinel, Fletcher twisting her apron, Blake slouched defiantly in the doorway. Poirot continued. The illusion depends upon the bolt, a heavy brass affair thrown from inside. But observe. He produced a length of fine twine from his pocket, demonstrating upon the drawing room's French doors. A loop around the bolt, the end passed beneath the door. There is always a gap in these old houses, n'est-ce pas? Pulled taut from the corridor to engage it. Then, with a hooked wire or merely patience, the string retrieved through the same gap. The door appears locked from within, the room sealed, yet the deceiver has come and gone. Fletcher gasped. The servants' passage. I knew of the gap. Indeed, Poirot said. And the string leaves faint scratches upon the frame. Scratches, I observed. Your partial confession, madame, moving jars to protect Miss Victoria, revealed the passage's use. But the mechanism was observed and perfected by another. Whitby shifted uncomfortably. But the dosage, the precise knowledge. Patience, doctor. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The telephone call, fabricated to draw her ladyship away at the vital moment. No record of the exchange, yet the bell rang. How? A confederate outside, perhaps, or a simple timing device, but more likely, the study extension rung from within the house. Victoria paled. I was in the village. Yet your car remained in the stable, Poirot replied gently. And the hidden notebook, Lady Eleanor's private observations, details your attachment to Dr. Whitby, meetings in the summer house. She intended to expose not only his credentials, but the affair that threatened her control over your inheritance. Gasps rippled through the room. Whitby rose, face ashen. This is outrageous. Non, Poirot said firmly. The aconite traces upon your medical bag from handling the augmented blend. The bitterness in my own tisane, your attempt to silence inquiry when exposure loomed. Thorne interjected gruffly. But the hemlock? My samples? A misdirection you yourself encouraged, Captain, perhaps unconsciously. The glove in the passage, Blake's, but placed by one who borrowed it. Blake muttered. I said it was stolen. Indeed, Poirot agreed. Stolen by the one who needed garden access without suspicion. He turned to Whitby. You, Doctor, possessed the knowledge of dosage, the exact augmentation to ensure fatality while masking taste. You rang the study bell yourself, knowing her habit to answer personally. Entered via the passage with borrowed key from Fletcher's ring, perhaps taken during her distraction protecting Miss Victoria. Substituted the blend, pulled the string to bolt the door, retrieved it, and departed. The perfect illusion of the locked room. Whitby trembled. You have no proof. The laboratory will confirm the aconite on your bag, Poirot said calmly, and the string fibers beneath the door, matching that in your surgical kit for sutures. Silence fell, broken only by the rain. Fletcher wept softly. Victoria stared at Whitby in horror. Thorne exhaled heavily. The illusion shattered. The locked room was no longer impossible, merely clever deception. Yet one thread remained. Had Victoria known, or was Whitby sole architect, protecting their future? Poirot watched Whitby slump into a chair, defeat in his eyes. The little grey cells had pierced the veil. But the full confession would come in time. Chapter 8. Bitter Infusions. The drawing room seemed to contract under the weight of Poirot's revelation. The rain against the windows, a relentless drumbeat underscoring the silence that followed. Dr. James Whitby remained slumped in his chair, his face a mask of defeat, the polished spectacles in his hand reflecting the fire's dying glow like twin accusations. The others sat frozen, Victoria with a hand pressed to her mouth, Thorne rigid as a soldier at attention, Fletcher weeping quietly into her apron, Blake watching with grim satisfaction. Poirot allowed the silence to steep, like a bitter infusion gaining strength. You see, mes amis, the crime was not one of passion alone, but of calculation layered upon calculation. Dr. Whitby, your affair with Miss Langley provided the spark, the desire for a future unencumbered by Lady Eleanor's disapproval, and her threat to expose your falsified credentials. But the execution required opportunity and misdirection. Whitby stirred at last, his voice hoarse. You have the mechanism, the string, the passage, but the dose. How could I know her exact blend that day? Poirot smiled faintly. You observed her ritual daily, Doctor, and the fabricated telephone call. You rang from the study extension yourself, knowing she would answer promptly. In those brief minutes, you entered via the passage, key borrowed from Mrs. Fletcher's ring during one of her tidyings. You augmented the prepared mixture with aconite from Blake's shed, roots you harvested wearing his glove, later planted as evidence to incriminate the obvious suspect. Blake muttered an oath. So, that's why my glove vanished. Precisely, Poirot continued. The Indian hemlock, Captain, your samples, served as a splendid red herring. Rumours you perhaps encouraged unwittingly. Mrs. Fletcher's tampering, moving jars to shield Miss Victoria, provided chaos you exploited, adding the final lethal measure when suspicion turned elsewhere. Victoria found her voice, trembling. James, did I drive you to this? Whitby looked at her, eyes hollow. She would have ruined us both. Disinheritance for you, professional disgrace for me. I acted alone in the deed, but the bitterness, it infused everything. Fletcher sobbed. I suspected, but loyalty blinded me. She treated me as family, yet never acknowledged it. Poirot's tone softened. Loyalty, madame, is admirable until it shields murder. But the true architect is here. He turned fully to Whitby. The aconite upon your bag, the string fibres matching your surgical twine, the bitterness in my own cup, your desperate attempt to halt the inquiry, all confirms it. The room held its breath as Whitby rose slowly, composure cracking like thin ice. Yes, he whispered at last. I did it. For us. For a life free of her control. The gentle art. I perverted it utterly. A collective exhale escaped the assembled. Victoria turned away, tears streaming. Thorne stared into the fire, disillusioned. Blake shook his head in disgust. Fletcher crossed herself. Poirot sighed. The human heart brews the bitterest infusions, mes amis. Ambition, love, fear, blended in lethal proportion. He signalled the butler, who had lingered discreetly. The constable awaits outside. Justice, though delayed, is precise. As Whitby was led away, hands cuffed by the arriving officers, the rain began to ease, a pale shaft of sunlight piercing the clouds. The drawing room, once heavy with suspicion, felt suddenly lighter, though the faint herbal scent remained, a reminder that beauty and peril often steep together. The bitter infusion had been poured out. Truth, at last, prevailed. Chapter 9. The Final Steep. With Dr. Whitby's confession hanging in the air like the last wisp of steam from a cooling cup, the drawing room fell into a profound hush. The rain had ceased, leaving only the occasional drip from the eaves and the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Poirot regarded the assembled company with a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. The little grey cells had triumphed, yet the human cost of truth was ever bittersweet. Victoria Langley rose unsteadily, her face pale as porcelain. You acted alone, she whispered to Whitby. Without my knowledge? He nodded, eyes downcast. I could not bear to see you ruined, disinherited, bound forever to her whims. The affair, it was my weakness. But the poison, mine entirely. You knew nothing of the deed. Victoria sank back, a sob escaping her. Relief mingled with horror. She had loved a murderer, albeit one who claimed to kill for her sake. Mrs. Fletcher, her devotion shattered, murmured prayers under her breath. I shielded what I feared was her impetuosity, hiding jars, lying about the key. But this monstrosity. Captain Thorne cleared his throat, his military bearing reasserting itself. A coward's crime, hiding behind herbs and deception. I spread tales of my hemlock to boast, perhaps, but never imagined. Blake, the gardener, spoke gruffly from the doorway. My glove used to frame me, and the roots stolen from my shed, all for his ambition. Poirot raised a hand for silence. Non, mes amis. Let us clarify the final steep, the complete infusion of truth. Dr. Whitby observed Mrs. Fletcher's partial tampering, her moving of jars to protect Miss Victoria after overhearing threats. This chaos provided cover. He harvested aconite wearing Blake's glove, taken from the shed to cast suspicion on the dismissed gardener with motive obvious. The Indian hemlock, encouraged in rumour, diverted toward exotic means. The fabricated telephone call, wrung from the study, drew Lady Eleanor away briefly. Entry via the passage, key borrowed fleetingly from Fletcher's ring. Augmentation of the blend with lethal dose, masked expertly by his medical knowledge. Then the string mechanism, observed perhaps during a previous tidying, to bolt the door from without, creating the locked room illusion. My own tisane, tainted when suspicion mounted, a desperate flourish. Whitby lifted his head at last. All true. She discovered my falsified papers, threatened exposure, and the affair. She would have cut Victoria off entirely. I saw no other path. The gentle art she taught me well. Too well. The constable entered then, solemn-faced, to take formal statements. Whitby offered no resistance, allowing himself to be led away with quiet resignation. Victoria wept openly now, the weight of complicity and ignorance crushing her. Fletcher embraced her awkwardly, two women bound by loss. Thorne excused himself stiffly, seeking solitude. Blake departed for the gardens, finding solace in honest earth. Poirot lingered by the fireplace, watching the embers die. The manor would recover. Estate to Victoria, unencumbered now. Gardens tended anew. But the perfume of herbs would forever carry a shadow. The final steep had yielded its essence. A crime born not of sudden rage, but slow-brewed desperation, ambition, forbidden love, fear of ruin. Truth, like the perfect infusion, required patience and precision. Chapter 10. Order restored. The manor settled into an uneasy quiet in the days that followed Dr. Whitby's arrest. The constable had taken him away in the early evening, the gravel crunching beneath the wheels of the police motor as it vanished down the mist-shrouded drive. Willowbrook Manor, for all its elegance, felt suddenly hollow, like a delicate porcelain cup emptied of its infusion, the aroma lingering, but the substance gone. Poirot lingered a day longer, at the request of the chief constable, to tie the final threads. He walked the gardens one last time, noting how Blake had already begun pruning the monk's hood with grim determination, cutting back the hooded blue flowers that had provided the instrument of death. The hidden passage was sealed, the string mechanism explained to the household staff as a cautionary curiosity. The conservatory jars were catalogued and locked away, pending the executor's instructions. Victoria Langley received him in the morning room, her morning gown exchanged for a simpler grey wool. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but steady. "I shall sell the London house," she said quietly, "pay the debts, and marry, if he will still have me, my artist. Aunt's conditions die with her control." Poirot bowed. "Wisdom, mademoiselle. Freedom earned, though at terrible cost." Mrs. Fletcher tendered her resignation, but Victoria refused it. "You were loyal to her memory, even in error. Stay, if you wish. The manor needs familiar hands." The housekeeper wept anew, but this time with relief. "She was my half-sister, you know. Born on the wrong side of the blanket. Never acknowledged, but she kept me close. I thought shielding Miss Victoria honoured her." "Human hearts," Poirot replied gently, "brew complex infusions." Captain Thorne departed for London, his hopes of renewed courtship buried with old regrets. Blake accepted reinstatement at higher wages, Victoria's first act as mistress. On the final morning, Poirot took tea, proper English breakfast tea, brewed by Fletcher under his watchful eye, in the drawing-room. The fire crackled cheerfully, the rain had cleared, and weak sunlight gilded the Persian rug where Lady Eleanor had fallen. He sipped slowly, savouring the untainted blend. "The gentle art," he mused aloud to the empty room, "demands precision, balance, purity. So too does life. When ambition or passion augments the natural measure, bitterness results." He adjusted the points of his moustache with satisfaction, the familiar ritual restoring his own sense of order. The little grey cells, having laboured diligently, now rested content. The case was closed. Justice, precise as a measured gram of chamomile, had been served. As the Rolls-Royce bore him away down the drive, Poirot glanced back at Willowbrook Manor, ivy-clad, serene once more beneath clearing skies. The gardens would bloom again in spring, the herbs tended with caution but not fear. Order, after the brief chaos of murder, had been restored. Not perfectly, for human affairs never achieve the symmetry of a Swiss clock, but sufficiently. And in the quiet of the journey home, Poirot allowed himself a small smile. Another triumph for the little grey cells. The gentle art of detection had prevailed. Hello, my dearest listeners, and welcome to the soothing close of the gentle art of brewing the perfect herbal tea here on Pillow Tales. I am Clara Beaumont, your companion through these whispered hours, and I am so grateful you have journeyed with me to the very end of this refined mystery. The little grey cells of Monsieur Hercule Poirot have done their work once more. Order has been restored to Willowbrook Manor. The gardens will bloom again in spring. The conservatory jars will be tended with care rather than fear, and the gentle art of brewing herbal tea, pure, precise, and untainted, will continue under wiser hands. Truth, like the finest infusion, requires only the correct measure: patience, clarity, and balance. When those are honored, even the bitterest leaf yields peace. Feel that peace settle over you now, dear listener. Let the quiet of the English countryside, the faint scent of chamomile on the evening air, and the satisfied symmetry of a solved mystery carry you gently towards slumber. Breathe deeply, exhale slowly. Allow your thoughts to drift like petals on still water. The manor sleeps. Poirot sleeps, his magnificent moustache perfectly groomed, his conscience at rest. And now, so may you. Sleep deeply, my friends. Dream sweetly of orderly gardens and harmless brews. May morning find you refreshed and renewed. Good night. Until our next tale. This is Clara Beaumont, whispering you into the gentlest of slumbers. Sweet dreams.